Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this IRPS Roundtable. My name is Pierre, and I work as a student collaborator here at the Alumni Office, along with Karine Le. Before we start, I'd like to ask every attendee to put themselves in grid view so they can see all the panelists and use the Q&A function to ask questions. You can ask questions in French or in English. And this roundtable is part of the very first edition of an Alumni Week, aiming to connect the Institute's alumni with its current students. And this is a collaboration with the Career Services. We thank Tiffany, who's a Career Services advisor here, for being here as a moderator. And I'm going to start by introducing each panelist. So Mira Fey has a PhD from IRPS, and he's a postdoctoral researcher and lecturer at the Haute Ecole de Travail Social of Geneva. Then we have Karl Gahnberg, who is the Director of Policy Development and Research at the Internet Society, a nonprofit advocacy organization which focuses on issues related to Internet governance. Then we have Ayushi Parvathaneni Pathipati, who's an Associate Manager of Global Policy at Viatris, a global pharmaceutical company. And finally, we have Raphael Zafran, who is Head of Learning, Program Development and Partnerships at the University of Geneva Center for Continuing and Distance Education. Thank you everyone for joining, and I will leave the floor to Tiffany, who will start with the first question.
Question to you, Karl. How did you make the most of your time at the Graduate Institute?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today and to talk to everyone about our experiences. No, as Mira mentioned, it's a big question. It has a lot of different answers to it. I think when I came to the Institute, I think I had one idea of what I was going to make out of it. And then after the Institute, I think it turned out that I got something different out of it, not necessarily completely diverging from the expectation, but to Mira's point, to me, something that proved to be, let's say, surprisingly valuable, or it was something that I hadn't really thought about in advance, was really the fellow students and the quality of the fellow students. I had studied in Sweden before, and it was a great study environment. I had great fellow students. But it kind of upped the level when you got to the Graduate Institute, both in terms of people's ambitions and also their past experiences. So I would say I learned a lot from my fellow students, and that was a big takeaway for me. At the school itself, I think it was a great curriculum with a lot of diverse things to focus on. I came at it actually interested in cybersecurity, and at that time it wasn't that much at the Institute, unfortunately, but I could compensate that with other events happening in Geneva and the professional side of Geneva that kind of offered that. So the location of the Graduate Institute, the fellow students, and a good curriculum, I would say is the big takeaways for me from my time at the Institute.
Thank you, Karl. Yeah, it's true that the community within the Institute is very rich. What about you, Ayushi? How did you make the most of your time at the Institute?
Well, when I first heard the question, it really took me back to the time of being a student and just thinking about all the things I really did. And it's been a while. So thank you for that question and taking me back to all the great memories at the Institute. I think when I was at the Institute, to the point that both Karl and Mira made, that I spent a lot of time attending classes. I think the MERPS program gives you very little time to breathe. And for that, I'm actually thankful. It was a good way to immerse myself in classes that were not only of my interest area, but also to explore, other courses that eventually led me to this career in public health. So I started out being very interested in humanitarian affairs, and I did my thesis on refugees, but somehow ended up in global public health after having done a lot of classes on political economy and exploring global public health through other seminars offered by other departments. So I think academically, just the diversity of classes, as well as just the depth and degree with which you learn both theory as well as how you can apply that theory is how I spent my time. When I think of outside of it, really attending a lot of the seminars and panel discussions in the auditorium, being able to meet classmates across different programs, hear about what they're doing and the projects they're working on is perhaps the biggest value that I think the Graduate Institute has given me, and I feel like I like Mira said, some of my best friends are from the Institute. It's an experience we've taken together, and it's just so amazing to see all the different things we've ended up doing since then.
Thank you, Ayushi. So last but not least, Raphael, what about you? How did you make the most of your time at the Institute?
Yeah, thank you again for inviting me today, and hi to everybody. Well, I guess my experience is a bit different in the sense that I came for the institute just for the PhD. I had done my master's in Canada before, so I had still some fun at the institute, but I was a bit of in a different sort of angle. But I would agree with the fact that really Geneva and the institute's location is really something that's quite unique. And that's also because of the connections that you can make and the opportunities you can get. And I would say that one of the best decisions I made, I think, when I arrived at the institute, was to really look out for any opportunity to gain some sort of practical professional experience. That's, to me, how I made the most out of my sort of doctoral studies in Geneva. And it involved, I mean, at first these experiences were not exactly jobs that had anything to do with my PhD research or the career that I was hoping to have in policy or in academia. It involved volunteering for small NGOs that I believed in, or getting a job as an admin assistant at the institute, or even helping with the logistics at the institute's career forum with Karine. And really, it got me started, and I met some wonderful people. I learned some valuable skills along the way, and skills that maybe I wouldn't have got during from the actual PhD program. And actually, when I think of the career opportunities that I got later on that had a more longer term sort of potential, I could always sort of trace back to these initial smaller jobs. And I think that's really something that both the institute gives you and also being in Geneva provides you with. And I guess to conclude on this, making the most of the time at the institute is really, it really depends on sort of the career and the life you want to build on. And I think one mistake maybe graduate students make is that they're hoping to get their dream internship or job right off the bat, or during the program or when they're just done. And it generates a lot of stress, because if you don't get that, if that's your standard, then you end up being really disappointed or stressed, and you sort of not see the potential that other maybe more sort of humble opportunities can give you down the line. So to sum of that, I think that I made most out of my time at the institute by keeping an open mind about job opportunities and adopting this sort of sampling approach to sort of job prospects, and it really helped me gain some valuable skills and narrow down what I like and not like so much.
Thank you, Raphael. I think it's really interesting what you pointed out, because it's true that a lot of students actually have this kind of narrow vision sometimes of what they really want, and so they kind of like pass on certain opportunities. Which leads me kind of to the second general question addressed to all panelists is, are there any particular challenges that you have experienced at the outset of your career? And we could start with you, Mira.
Yes, thank you so much. So I think the outside of my career would probably be when I finished the PhD. I guess because I did the PhD right after the master. I did the fast track program, so I didn't really have much of a pause in between. And in the last year of my PhD, when I really started applying for mostly postdoctoral opportunities, I mean, there were definitely challenges in terms of not getting a job. And also obviously in time management, because I needed to finish my PhD while also working part-time to finance myself and also applying for jobs. So it was definitely a challenge also in that way. And then also in the last, I want to say until last year, it was still quite challenging because I was doing a postdoc part-time in Geneva, and which kind of paid for my living costs, but not really. So that was definitely another challenge. So both the lack of opportunities and the rejections, dealing with rejections, and also the financial insecurity, I think were big parts of my, just last year of the PhD and the immediate postdoc time, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you, Mira. I think these are common issues that our students definitely, face at the beginning after they graduate. Now, to you, Carl, do you have particular challenges that you have experienced at the outset of your career?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes in kind of cycles through the career as well, that you find dips in having challenges along the way. I would say the outside of my career, when I finished my master's and getting that first job was certainly a challenge for me, and quite a tough time, to be honest, because you're seeing your fellow students. Some of them had a job before graduation, some of them are getting it very quickly after graduation. And for me, it took about 6 months before I landed my first job. And that was a tough time, both in, seeing your friends and colleagues kind of getting on with it and starting off their career, while you yourself, in my case, I had these unfortunate cycles of interviews where I would get to the last stage of one, get rejected, and then next one started. So it was very frustrating and certainly tough on the confidence as well. But managed to fight through it and got through it in the end. But it was definitely a tough time. And I think what's important to remember for someone who's coming out from a program is that it is effectively a numbers game when you're applying for jobs. I've seen a lot of people that have applied for jobs at my organization throughout the years that have had perfect profiles, really excellent students, really excellent professionals. It just hasn't been a match with what we needed at the time, or budgets, or whatever it might be. And I think that's important to kind of understand, that there's a such side when you're applying for jobs, that it doesn't necessarily have to do anything with you. It just has to do with what that organization has capacity to do, or their requirements at that moment. So to remember that it is a numbers game, don't get discouraged, and to hang in there. But that was definitely a tough time in the career. To just get a foot in the door and get started was challenging.
Thank you for sharing this. Now to you, Ayushi, are there any particular challenges, struggles that you had that you'd like to share with our students today that you experienced at the beginning of your career?
Yeah, and also just to let them know that those challenges never cease to exist. I feel like at every stage of your career, you're going through a different set of issues. But I think to start, something that was personal to me is the fact that I'd come into this program right out of an undergraduate degree. So, having all these prolific classmates who had great experience, or sometimes, had the opportunity to work and live in different parts of the world. I didn't really have that on my resume to start. So just breaking into that first internship was perhaps the biggest challenge I had. I learned not to take rejections personally, because sometimes you would apply, to 15 different internships at the same organization, but actually end up getting the internship the 16th time. So I think I became a master of not taking rejections personally, and just learning to try again, because I think sometimes we just tell ourselves, oh, it didn't work out at this place the first time, let me, not try it ever again. And I think the one thing I would say that, I appreciate myself and my peers for is that we kept trying and trying again. We didn't really give up with that one rejection. And like others have said, it was a numbers game. So you have to try, every opportunity that's available at first. And then, you might just find your dream job along the way, or might develop a set of skills that'll help you in your dream job later. So I think I learned that even with those challenges, every opportunity is one to build a skill set that will help you in a future job. So I think that's what I take away with me. But I realized that the challenges don't just stop with getting that first job. You always take a day zero or a day one mentality with you everywhere you go. There's always a lot to learn, and if you take that sort of mindset, what seems like a challenging opportunity at first could be, the best experience you've hoped for.
Thank you, Ayushi. And yeah, I think it's really important to point out the fact that, it could be the 16th time that you apply, you could get the position, because just, last week I had a student telling me I applied 3 times for ICRC. I don't know why I'm not getting it. And, it's important to keep in mind not to give up. So now, Raphael, what about you? Did you face any struggles at the outset of your career?
I consider myself very lucky and privileged indeed, because I didn't experience some of the hardships that many students have to face during or after their studies. And I can't even imagine what it's been like to be a student or recent graduate during the pandemic. So I can't say that I struggled much. Also because, like I said, I was sort of at the institute for the PhD, and I started working alongside the studies quite rapidly after the start of my studies. So the transition to the working world was, I guess, perhaps easier and smoother than some of my fellow graduates that sort of were looking for a job after a master's degree, for example. So I guess that was quite. I guess it was less stressful. I guess I had a bit of a, I guess, more intellectual dilemma when I guess I approached the end of my PhD. It was about sort of whether to pursue a full-time academic career or go down more the sort of policy track. I think this is something that we can even discuss a bit later on, because Mira also has done a PhD. Carl is currently doing one. Yeah, and I think it's quite common at the Graduate Institute among PhD students. You kind of sort of pressured by your supervisor, by your peers, that you have to sort of publish a lot, that you have to go into sort of methods training quite early on, and aim for sort of the best sort of tenure track or the best postdocs early on. So that creates a lot of stress for PhD students, especially if you're not really sure what you want to do afterwards. And that choice seems quite definitive for many. Do I go and I invest my time into publishing and teaching and so forth, so I build my sort of full-time academic career profile, or do I invest more in sort of more policy-oriented internships and jobs alongside the PhD? But in the end, what I found out is that nothing is really definitive, and it's really not a binary choice. So and in the end, like Carl was saying, it's a numbers game. It's also, there's a part of luck, and you really follow what opportunities you have, the people that you like. To me, it was a boss that I really admired, and that had a profile that sort of inspired me. So you sort of also follow what comes to you, and it's also about knowing when to say, okay, this is not for me, I'll go somewhere else. And in the end, like I said, it's not a really definitive choice, because there are more and more hybrid careers that combine sort of academic components with more policy-oriented components, especially for people graduating from the Institute, and especially in Geneva. And I think you have to, for people who are interested in doing PhDs at the Institute, you have to resist that sort of pressure that's put on you, that you have to be one certain model, one certain type of academic, because there are many jobs that you can't even think of that are out there and that need your skills. So yeah, I think, and especially for those of us who want to make I guess a difference and get involved in development, the sustainable development goals. These are very sort of major global challenges and wicked problems, they require sort of interdisciplinary profiles and a wide range of skills. So, you know, having a sort of a hybrid career or hybrid approach to your careers is, I think, a right move for when you graduate from the institute.
Thank you, Raphael, for your insight. So now we're going to move on to the specific questions to specific panelists. So we'll start with you, Mira. The question that we would have is, you know, we have a lot of students who want to establish themselves in a particular field. So can you share your experience in becoming an expert in LGBTQIA plus visibility?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I wouldn't really, I mean, I guess it's one of the areas I'm working on, but yeah, I'm leading a project at the moment that is focused on that topic. So I guess you can call myself an expert in some way, but I think this goes back to exactly what Raphael just said. Get involved with perhaps NGOs or associations. I mean, what I did in Geneva was, for instance, 3 years ago, I got involved, 2 years ago, I got involved with the Pride organization and was the co-leader of the political team of the Pride organization, for instance. And also before, during my PhD, got involved in similar aspects. So I think, yeah, just find maybe NGOs, associations, or other bodies that represent what you're interested in and try to gain some external experience there if you don't already have that, I think. And then, of course, the other side would be, I mean, which I didn't do at the time because my PhD was focused on a different subject. But of course, you could also focus part of your PhD or your whole PhD on the issue that you want to work on. But I think what I focus my PhD on is still something I'm very interested in, but I didn't really take many strategic choices, I would say, when I was doing the PhD. I worked on prostitution policy, which was something I was very interested in and I remain interested in and passionate about, but it turns out there are not 100 jobs available for a political scientist working on prostitution policy, not even 10 normally. I guess you can also choose your topic more strategically, but I'm not even sure if I would advise that. I think what I always tell students is work on something that you're passionate about, because otherwise you'll lose interest quickly, or it will just feel like a big chore to complete. And I mean, that's not really what the PhD is about. Sure, should treat it as a job in the end and not as all your life, but at the same time also you should probably do it in something that you're interested in. Yeah, otherwise it will be very hard. But yeah, overall, I think also try to branch out of the institute, try to make connections, maybe also go abroad. I mean, what I did, I was lucky to get a grant from the Swiss National Science Foundation, where I spent a year in the US, which also gave me a lot of different experience, both with academia and also fieldwork, activism, and those kind of things. So yeah, I think just try to make the most of your time by using all kinds of opportunities that come along the way, and don't only rely on, I think, the academic path. So basically what Raphael also said, in that sense, makes a lot of sense. I have to say I didn't quite feel the same pressure that he mentioned, but also maybe it depends on the cohort. Yeah, maybe I was also lucky to already have a paper published when I finished the PhD because of some conferences I went to. But so I kind of was lifted of that pressure at that point. Yeah, but I think that would be my advice.
Thank you very much, Mira. Now the question goes to Carl. You went from being a policy advisor to the Director of Policy and Development Research at the Internet Society. So can you tell us about what helped you as a professional to move up in the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's perhaps helpful to start with just describing in the policy field. I tend to think about there being two kind of different profiles in the policy field. On the one hand, you have people that do policy engagement, that is more on the kind of lobbying and advocacy. So you either do one-to-one engagement with decision makers, or you create advocacy campaigns for a more public audience. And on the other hand, you have more of the policy analysis side that is more on the research, the policy development, formulating a position, and so forth. And when I started my career, I was more on the policy engagement side because I had just come from the UN, and I was hired basically to do engagements here in Geneva with decision making from governments, with the UN institutions, and also some of the work in the OECD, for instance, which I found to be, it was interesting, but it wasn't really where my passion was. I thought it was not necessarily the most perfect fit for me. I didn't feel like I could necessarily excel in that role of doing the policy engagement, but I felt more comfortable and was more interested in the analytical side of things. And at that time, when I started, my profile as a policy advisor was roughly 70% engagement and 30% analysis. So what I did was basically try to gradually grow the analysis side of my portfolio over time and show that I had an interest in that, jumped on projects where my time could be more allocated towards analysis than engagement. And to Mira's point, that is really helpful because you perform better when you enjoy what you're working on and that you feel really passionate about what you're working on. So I think that was the big thing for me to be able to shift my portfolio over time to do more analysis. And there was also sort of a demand within the organization of finding a more systematic approach for how we created our positions on things. So I'm kind of the person in the background that helps do the systematic thinking of something. And then I have colleagues that go out and talk to the policymakers and move that position forward. And it requires a little bit different skill sets. And I think I was more prone for the analysis side. I would say the other thing that was really helpful for me was that, especially in the field that I'm working on, which is on internet governance, a very technical field, was that we're an organization where half of us is engineers. They have an engineering background. And I really enjoy learning about technology. And I quickly realized that if you wanted to learn things, you kind of needed to almost you need to learn how to communicate with engineers in order to really understand what they were saying. It's kind of getting familiar with another culture almost. But once you unlock that thing, you realize that there's a lot of things to learn, and there's a lot of interesting policy questions that arise once you understand the technology a little bit better. So I spent a lot of time on that, talking with the experts on the subject matter that I was working on, and that proved to be really, really helpful as well. I should say, just as a final thing, we had a question in the chat here about full-time work and doing a PhD on the side. So I've been doing that, and I'm still doing that. And one of the reasons I started my PhD was because I wanted to shift my profile more towards this analytical side rather than engagement. And I can tell you that it's worked fine. It's obviously challenging to balance the both, but overall it works okay because you lose some of the stress that I think you have when you're a full-time PhD in terms of thinking about what is coming after the PhD. I don't have that stress, for instance. And also I can draw inspiration from the things that I do at work that feeds into my PhD. So it's challenging, but it's easier than it might seem.
Thank you, Carl. Ayushi, you have worked for numerous organizations. It shows, how well you do at interviews. And, I have a lot of students coming to us at the career services asking us, how to do better at interviews. So what advice would you give to students to succeed at their interviews?
Well, I guess to preface the number of interviews and the places I've worked at, I had to move countries. So as a result, when you're working in different markets, you end up working at very, very different places. But I think, a couple of words of advice to students who are trying to interview for internships or jobs is you quickly realize a lot of internships have a couple of questions that are common to them, and a couple of them that are very specific to you, as well as the job they're interviewing for. So I think The questions that are specific to the candidate usually tend to be, tell me a bit about yourself, tell me a bit about your background and your interests and why you're applying to this job. So I think having that script down about what your motivations are, what your story is, why you're academically interested in international relations and why you're applying for the internship or the organization at all. Those things take a little bit of research, but I think if you come with an answer that is prepared, where you know what the organization is doing, what the job expects, and what you can bring to that role, I think that really holds students and any person who's applying for a job in good stead. That sort of preparation is essential. I think the other thing with interviews is I try to remind a lot of students or other people who speak with me about this, that it's as much an opportunity for you to interview the place you're working for, as it is for them to get to know you and hire you. So I think take it as an opportunity to get to know the kind of organization it is, the team you're working for. Don't be afraid to ask, a couple of questions about the individual experience of the person who's trying to hire you, as well as what, the organization's looking like, because there's so little candidates tend to know outside in, that it's good to ask those specific questions because it shows the interest the candidate has in truly understanding the job and wanting to be a part of that organization. So I think having the script of why you're motivated, what brings you to the table, why you would like to join the organization, what the team actually does, very basic things that sometimes we forget to prepare for along the way. So I think that's sort of the advice that I would give to anyone going for multiple interviews, and also just being ready for different scenarios. They tend to ask questions about what would you do if you were placed in this situation, or where do you see yourself in 5 years, and even if we don't have an answer, just being able to tell them how we truly feel, getting to know them and building that rapport during the interview is essential. That's what, that first impression is really what carries you through all the different rounds. And if you don't get the job, you don't get the job. It's still an experience that you can take into the next interview. And sometimes you never know, if you interviewed really well and didn't make it to the job, they might call you back in 6 months for another role. So don't take a failed interview as the end of the journey. It could be the start of another journey and another job that they might call you back for.
Thank you, Ayushi, for the advice. So now, Rafael, I'd like to ask you, what made you decide to do a PhD, and also how did it serve you in your career? And maybe, Mira, since you did a PhD, Carl, you're doing a PhD, you'll be able to also add a little bit to what Rafael has to say.
So actually building on what's been said, in particular by Mira, I would say initially my passion for the topic I was studying had a big role in the initial decision to pursue a PhD. So as I said, I did my master's in Canada, and I wrote my master's thesis on exit strategies in the context of military interventions. And I focused on a single case study. And I had a supervisor who really encouraged me to expand on it because I had only scratched the surface. So having that initial push from my supervisor definitely gave me the confidence to apply to the institute. But what was really important is that I could really see myself research that topic for a few years. Because when you start a PhD, you're in it for 4 to 5 years, sometimes more. Then as to how it served me in my career, I can see, I guess, a few aspects. When I worked in policy or intelligence, the PhD training, I would say, especially in political science and international relations, provided me with really good and really valuable research and analytical skills. Also the capacity to deal with massive volumes of information to analyze, and selecting what's most important, and also making links between different political or positions or events. then when I started working in capacity building, continuing education training, I guess the expertise I had acquired in international security during the PhD provided me with a certain sense of legitimacy to teach and to design my own modules to be delivered in training courses. It gave me also the sort of the methods training I acquired allowed me to then transfer that to my students or participants. It's really invaluable to also know how, not only know how to teach, know the expertise, but also know how to conduct research. It's a real training, and you do that as well at the master's level. You start doing that. And I guess also in university settings and in executive education currently, having a PhD when dealing with professors and experts also gives you sort of the credibility to challenge them, to advise them as well. But again, going back to something I was saying earlier, I mean, as I said, I made the decision to do the PhD while working on the side. And I think, I mean, it was tough, but it definitely helped me in my career. And that speaks to a question that was raised in the chat about whether it's possible to work full-time during a PhD in IR. Well, I mean, there are some legal constraints depending on what sort of visa or permit you have. You may only be able to work part-time. And then the Institute provides a lot of good opportunities in terms of working as a teaching or research assistant. And I believe now that the Institute provides you one single full-time contract in which you have both the research assistantship, teaching assistantship, and a PhD included, which is great. That was not the case at the time of my PhD. But I think I'd say to sum up that doing a PhD, as I mentioned before, can be an advantage for people, even for people considering non-academic career. It's not only that you're not sure what you do, but even if you are actually know that you want to do a policy career. But what I would say is that you need a strategy, or it's better to have a strategy in terms of what you do besides the PhD, so that you can develop your skill set a bit beyond what you get from the PhD in terms of skills.
Thank you, Raphael. I don't know if Carl or Mira, you have anything to add to what Raphael already said.
Yeah, I can just add that I think that those kind of general skills that you get in academia, whether it's through your master's or in the PhD, when it comes to research design and methodology, has been super important for me. And I kind of want to promote one of the classes I remember from my master's was, I think, a research design by David Sylvan, who turned out to be actually a very valuable class for me, because it kind of just described that it wasn't focused on any particular method. It was more, what is sound research design? And that has proven really, really valuable in just scrutinizing other results, scrutinizing what other people are doing in your field. Sound thinking, very valuable course for me. I would say also that if, you know, my experience of doing a PhD, I'm doing it part-time to work, or well, in parallel to work. And what has been challenging when you're doing it in parallel to work is that you don't necessarily get the academic networking that I would love to do, go to more academic conferences and so forth. But it is a great place to be in to network. And if you are doing a PhD and is interested to go more towards policy later, it's an awesome opportunity to reach out to people in the policy field, talk to them, learn from them in your research. Not least because there are a lot of people in the policy field that wish they had done a PhD. I have so many people at my organization that dropped off 2 years in or something. So they have some love for the academic thinking, and they love to be involved in research and to contribute to research. So really take advantage of that and engage with people in the policy field, because they usually enjoy hearing what you're working on and enjoy contributing to what you're working on as well.
Thank you, Carl. I'll go back to you, Mira. Just trying to keep the answers as short as possible because we do have, you know, this amount of time that's kind of limited to us, and we still have to have some time for the students to ask questions. Mira, just because we talked about the PhD, the choices of making the PhD. Now, can you talk maybe about just the reality of it? Because sometimes students have certain expectations, and how is it like the difficulties that maybe it entails, or how it's like really?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Well, I have to say that I think it's quite different in different people's experience. But in my experience, I was quite lucky because I was, since I did the fast track, I already knew professors at the institute, and I was fortunate to, yeah, work all throughout my PhD at the institute, either as teaching or research assistant. And then I got the grant to go to US. So I was quite lucky in that sense that I was able to support myself financially like that, while also gaining experience that was later then important for the job market. Now looking back, I have to say, while it seemed like a lot of work at the time, now as a postdoc, working, teaching, leading a team, it's actually it wasn't that much. I am a lot busier now and work a lot more now. But I had a great time as well at the institute, just yeah, making all kinds of different experiences. So I think if I was to give advice to someone, I guess it would be twofold: to, of course, try and increase your profile, work on different things, work on what you're interested in, but also enjoy the time, because you won't really get it back, and you won't also get the freedom back that you have as a PhD student, where you really are in charge of most of your time freely, unless obviously like Carl, you're working. But I mean, if you're not doing that, and if you're working for the institute, then you still have a lot of freedom. It doesn't feel like this always, but you still do, I think, in my experience. Yeah.
Thank you, Mira. Carl, what do you think would be the key qualities or prerequisites to have to enter the field of internet governance?
Yeah, it is a relatively small field, to be honest, if we talk specifically around internet governance. But if we take it from more kind of digital policy, tech policy, more broadly, I do think that having an interest in the technology itself is quite helpful, because it helps you get to not necessarily deep levels of understanding technology, but at least one step below the more superficial level of technology. And that can be quite helpful, not least for conversations with people in the field about what are the issues going on. So I think getting some more familiarity with the technology itself is quite helpful. But other than that, I would say take the opportunity of for instance, in my field, there's a lot of fellowships that my organization offers, that some of our sister organizations are offering, that are great ways of getting in terms of meeting people, not only people that are non-fellows, but other fellows that might have a foot in the door already in the field. So it's a great way of kind of starting your networking. Personally, I find networking to be hard, but I don't think you should overcomplicate networking. It's really just having a conversation with someone, and once you've had a conversation once, it's easy to follow up on that. It doesn't have to be harder than that. It doesn't have to be the super charming, mind-blowing engagement. It's really just getting noticed out there and showing that you exist and that you're interested. And I think that's what people are looking for, people that are showing a genuine passion for getting into the field, because then they're happy to work with you and they're happy to share their experience and yeah, transfer that knowledge, because I think that is something that everyone has inherently, a little bit of a mentor role, that people enjoy talking about the work that they've been doing, enjoy talking about the experiences that they've had. So make use of that. Yeah, that would be my advice.
Thank you, Carl. Ayushi, students believe that, switching from IGOs to private sector to be challenging. How is it like for you?
Well, I think to start with the first part of the question, it can be challenging. but I was pleasantly surprised by my own experience that the transition is possible. And I think it all boils down to the fact that, you know, depending on the subspecialty and the sector that you're working in, there's always some level of private sector interface. So whether you're working in the private, whether you're working in public health or in any other space, there is always some private sector presence in all of those spaces, and those interactions also happen between NGOs and the private sector, whether it's a, you know, donor, you know, funded relationship, or it happens to be one where it's a multi-stakeholder partnership. You will find along the way that there are multiple opportunities for different types of organizations to collaborate, and sometimes it's the government's NGOs as well as the private sector. So not everyone has to be at odds with each other to work in the same space. And I think once I realized that those connections exist, and you know that there are those opportunities to work together, if you develop a strong core skill set that is applicable in various contexts, and in public health, that seems to be something that's an advantage for a candidate, you'd be surprised that people in the private sector are willing to take you in. But that said, I will preface by saying that, you know, in public health, you can be in very technical roles as someone who is, you know, either a medical professional or someone who has an epidemiology degree. So sometimes trying to bridge that gap might be a bit challenging. You can't become a medical doctor overnight, although you can get a PhD at the Institute. But you know, there are other roles where you're part of, you know, a policy analysis team. You're part of the overall strategy of the organization. You're part of, you know, grant monitoring, you know, implementation of joint programs that different organizations are working on, where you know, a student of the Institute, either a master's or a PhD student, could really apply those research and analysis skills they gain through the course of being at the Institute. So I think that transition is possible if you identify the right kind of role, as well as, you know, the right area where those interactions tend to happen. And I think for me, my prior job was a great way to have that exposure. I worked in a joint role between two NGOs called Vital Strategies and the NCD Alliance. NCD Alliance is based in Geneva and Vital Strategies is based in New York, and both worked on chronic conditions and non-communicable diseases. And in their work, there were a lot of private sector interactions with, you know, pharmaceutical companies, because there are multiple aspects of the job. There's the disease prevention bit, but, you know, pharma companies are also important to public health as they're providing the, you know, the medicines and therapeutics needed to tackle those challenges. So I think finding that place where the interaction occurs, and being able to demonstrate how your skills are applicable in a private sector context, I think are things that are very helpful in making that transition happen. So it's challenging, but not impossible. And if anyone wants to have a conversation further, we can take that offline.
Thank you, Ayushi. So really quickly, last question for you, Raphael. So being the founder and host of the Lifelong Learning at UNIG podcast, what advice would you give students to cultivate lifelong learning, and what positive impact do you believe it can have in people's careers?
What a great question. I'll try to be brief. Well, I'd say lifelong learning is really one of the values that has always sort of driven me. It echoes what I was saying earlier about seizing opportunities and trying different things in your career. It's about being curious and understand that learning and building yourself is not as a professional, it doesn't have to be about one single field or niche discipline. And we started the podcast to really show how important it is for professionals to stay curious and continue investing in their own continuing education. As you know, the world changes fast, and professional practices do as well. It's no longer enough to just do your bachelor's degree and your master's degree and then be done with it. And it's not only about formal training and diplomas and degrees, it's also about the people you talk to, it's about the mentors you have, it's about the podcasts you listen to, or the experiences you have beyond your main field of study. So just in terms of the positive impact that lifelong learning has, I found myself that having a learning mindset and a curious approach to topics that are not necessarily part of my field of expertise it's always been rewarding, and employers usually appreciate that because it shows that you have what they call a growth mindset, that you're aware that there are many things that you don't know, that you can improve in many things. And in fact, the research about the future of work and the future of skills shows that it's not only about building your skills, it's actually about staying relevant. If you start a job today, if you don't invest in continuing education and lifelong learning, it's possible that 5 years from now, because practices change so much, that you will have difficulty doing your job that you're doing today. So this is why we talk about lifelong learning. It's really a continuum.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Raphael. I'll leave the floor maybe to Karine to moderate the Q&A session for the few minutes we have left.
Well, I think all the questions were answered more or less. So I had the question from Patak. I don't know, Patak, if you want to open your camera and ask it yourself. It was, how did you pivot to a career in public health? We had Carl before who answered regarding engineering and technology. So I think you already answered a bit just previously, Ayushi. Maybe you can add something regarding the different skills needed in the positions in public health.
Absolutely. I think, one thing about my own experience, I think all the free time I had, the summers or the winters, I think I spent it doing an internship. So I remember the master's being a really busy period because even while classes were going on, I would try and do whatever part-time work I could. So to have a career in this space, I think that the skill set really needed depends on the role you want to be in. If you want to be in a policy and advocacy focused role like I was, the core skill set really there is what you're taught in your master's program. How do you do research? How do you conduct analysis? What are qualitative methods and quantitative methods? And outside of that, I think it's a lot of reading. So because I didn't really have a background in public health or in epidemiology, I would read a lot of research journals, be aware of what, the different disease classifications were like, what the different organizations were working on, how their funding models differed. So for instance, I had the opportunity to intern at Gavi as well as the Global Fund, appear like similar organizations, but also just work in very different ways. Just a very basic, how does the space work and where does the funding come from and how successful those programs have or have not been. And a lot of that information is actually just available on the internet, or if you go into libraries, so many students before us have written papers or theses on topics like that. So I think using those resources and arming yourself with the knowledge needed to know what the space is about is what enables you to get that first internship where you can develop the skill set further. But I think the first thing is to identify which part of the job you want to be in, and you may not know the answer today. It's you need to go through several internships before you figure out your true passions. But a grant implementation role would not be the same as a policy analysis role, would not be the same as, a strategy role. So I think once you know the area you enjoy is where you can develop the skills needed to do well there. I hope that answers the question, but people can reach out to me on my email if they would like to know more.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, go ahead, please, Carl.
Yeah, perhaps to add to that, the way that I think about it in terms of the knowledge that you need to kind of break into a field, a good reference for me has been kind of like what you would have. So in my field, it would be computer science. If I could, the level that you kind of need to start off with is to have done the intro course to a computer science program. I can imagine it being something similar if you're working in medicine, doing, looking what's online, reading the first articles that they would read in an intro course to biomedicine. I think that gives you all of the fundamental vocabulary and that kind of key to unlocking a lot of the other stuff. So that might be a helpful kind of reference. If the field that you're looking for, see if there's just an entry course at the undergrad level that will get you into a good starting point.
Thank you for this great advice, which is so true. Palak, would you like to take the floor and ask a question, or do I keep it?
No, it's all good. Thank you.
My pleasure. So we have a last question here from Maeva. To all of you, or who wants to take it, do you think that your work experience during your studies have been essential for the fact to find a job after?
I mean, I guess I can start briefly.
Yes, go ahead. Go
because
ahead.
this would be more linked to the academic market, really. But I think for me, I think yes, the jobs I had during both the masters, because I started also as research assistant during the masters, and then also in the PhD, have definitely been an advantage to then getting other jobs afterwards. I mean, for a long time it was not a permanent or full-time job, but I think making the most of the opportunities that arise and taking them up, as I think this was Carl who said this earlier on, or Raphael, that even though if it might not be a dream job in the beginning, just accept it anyway. I mean, unless it's obviously something you would hate, but I think it will be an advantage later on probably, and you, even if it's not something that you think is the best preparation for your future career, you will still get some skills out of it that will be useful, even if it's just working in a team, for instance, which is always something that is incredibly useful. And especially in Geneva, you will most likely work in a quite diverse team, which is always something demanded by recruiters. So I think already that will be incredibly useful, even in the masters.
Thank you, Mira. If no one wants to add something, I will give the floor back to Pierre. And before that, just want to thank you so much, all of you, for being on board today. Ayushi, thank you for being here from New York. Mira, was great to have you. Raphael, thank you again. And Carl also, and especially Tiffany from Career Services. Pierre, thank you for the organization, and I give you the floor. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Karine. Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists. Yeah, we're running short of time, so this is perfect. So it's been very interesting to hear you. Even myself, as an interdisciplinary student, I feel like a lot of your advice is relevant to me. And no, thank you for everything.